Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Freeformers Unplugged. Because you did the intro last week, I was like, oh, we actually didn't talk about who was going to do the intro this week. I assume it's me, and it is me. So there we go. Welcome back to another episode / live stream of Freeformers Unplugged, where our new revised format continues its pilot phase, where one of us sets a topic and the other writes 5 questions completely separately without the other person knowing what those questions are and asks them live on the live stream. We also then round off the podcast / live stream by doing our article of the week, which we've had some great joy talking about today. So I think we're delighted to share that with you a little bit later on today's live stream. Emily, how are you doing?
I'm really well. I'm doing, really good this week. I don't really know why. I've had sick children and projectile vomit and like everything going on in the background. But no, I'm like really, don't know. I think I'm just in denial about the whole thing, maybe. I'm doing well. Well, it's a long way of saying that. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm a little bit tired. It's been a long 2 weeks. I'm very much looking
Mm.
forward to spending a whole weekend with 2 small children. But that aside, and a children's birthday party as well, which is like, yeah, right. Like no parent goes
Deep breath.
children's birthday party, hooray! Because our children at the age where you don't just drop them off and leave them. Unfortunately, they have to be there.
I don't know how old, when can you start leaving them?
For my money now. Do it
Two,
now.
you're done.
Yeah. So anyway, so you have set the topic this week. Do you want to tell us what the topic is?
Yeah, the topic is about dashboards and why they don't actually drive any action. I mean, obviously, you can build fantastic dashboards, but I mean, I've worked in data or around data for over 10 years, and there's always like, oh, build us a dashboard, or we want to see what this looks like. And you're just like, yeah, but why? What is it you actually want to know? And what are you going to do afterwards? What are you going to do differently? And a lot of time is, I don't know, build us a dashboard. We want a dashboard. And I think that we can get very hung up in how data is presented, but forget about the person or people who are going to be using it. And so many people still to this day, like I talk to so many data teams and they're like, yeah, we have dashboards, but I know that nobody looks at them because they come and ask me, can I have the data sliced this way? Can I have it with, every second Tuesday missing or something that they could probably very easily do themselves, but then still require a data team to go and do it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that today, also because we are working with a client where we are kind of writing the requirements, the product requirements for different dashboards. So it's top of mind very much so in thinking about how do you create something that will actually drive action, particularly, of course, within our focus of HR and L&D, but a lot of these lessons apply more broadly as well.
Well, and we'll just quickly say hello to Gideon in chat. Not the Gideon that we know.
Oh, okay. Hi,
I
hi,
know
other Gideon.
other
I
Gideon.
do. I only know one Gideon. I've never met two, so
This
it's
is
very
this
nice to
is
meet you, other
it's a
Gideon.
third degree connection of mine, so I don't know, third degree
Oh,
plus. I don't know how they found us, but hello Gideon, you're welcome. We're both doing well. We kind of do a how are you at the beginning. They've asked how we are. I think we're okay. We're here. We're live. We're ready to live stream. So if anybody else is watching, which I know you are, because I can see the little ticker of people watching, do say hello in chat. Don't just leave Gideon there all by themselves saying how are you. Let us know who you are, where you. Well, the kind of platform tells us who you are because LinkedIn gives you your name, but like where you're dialing in from today. Let's dive into the questions then. I'm pleased with this first question. I think this is the first time I've had to
good.
write the questions.
And just as a reminder, I have never seen these before. I have no idea what it's going to come with. So we'll see how this rolls.
Absolutely. So the old adage is what's measured is managed.
Mm.
So why do dashboards fail to change behavior? If you're measuring it, surely it's being managed.
Yeah. So first of all, that quote is widely attributed to Peter Drucker, and it's normally get what gets measured gets managed. And I think it's actually a fallacy. I think he never actually said it, or there's definitely something that it's not, or he had a completely different meaning from what is intended. There's definitely something that's not completely right about that quote and to what it's come to mean in the day to day. So what it means, I mean, let's get down to it, is if you're measuring it, then it's going to be top of mind and you're going to be paying attention to it. If you've got targets around something, you're going to change your behavior so that you meet those targets or they become a priority. So if we take that as true, which yes, but not always to the way that you might want it to be true. And I imagine we'll touch on this later, as how targets change behavior, but not always in the way you want. It's really easy to game systems. You can see that with any sort of data collection. If someone has to put something in a field, they'll just fill it with rubbish. Like if you got people to work a certain number of hours per day, they'll just say they'd spent that much day. They'll actually expand their time to say, sure, I did 8 hours on this project, not counting for any of the tricky bits, because humans are inherently lazy and we're always looking for shortcuts. So sometimes targets can be a bad thing. And dashboards obviously measure things like targets, but not only. Lots of different things can be measured by a dashboard. So why don't they drive action? Well, a lot of the time it comes down to who's building the dashboard versus who's using it, right? I'll be honest, a lot of data people don't have a very user-centric way of doing it. If you've got one, or if you are someone who is data focused and you're very much thinking about people and you are a unicorn, you are amazing. Keep hold of that person and never let them run away, okay? Because there are so few people, and we see it in the role like data translator. And a while ago, like 2015 maybe, I worked on my mum's room. Thanks, mum. Friday she's here. I just brought us all one. Lovely. Sorry, not tea for everybody. I don't think she realizes she's live on the internet. Anyway, 10 or so, or 2014, actually, I think it was, I was working on, back when we were in the EU, working on a big European Union project called the European Data Science Academy. And we were part of like understanding, was when I went to the Open Data Institute, and we were trying to understand what are the data skills needed for the future, and what do people think they need versus what do managers and like hiring people, what do they think the demand is? Very much a demand analysis for skills. Then you can translate that into a curriculum, trickle that across lots of universities and organizations providing data training. And the key finding that has just been reiterated and reiterated to this day is that you got data people and you got business people, and never the twain shall meet. And this role, that data translator, that data storyteller, is just so, so vital. And that's what's missing from a lot of dashboards. So you'll go and you'll build something and you'll be like, wonderful, okay, I've built something great, people use it. It's that mentality of, I will build it and they will come, which obviously, like anyone who's tried to start up any kind of kooky social media business, for example, will know that is not the case. You have to really, really understand that you have essentially product market fit in its, and that's a very strange thing perhaps to say within an organization, but are you answering the needs of your users? Are you solving a problem for them with this dashboard? So that's point number one. It doesn't necessarily answer the user's needs. Ask a user what they need and they won't be able to tell you, right? People do not know what they need. Like this is like rule 101 in any sort of user research. If you ask them anything, they'll say, yeah, I think I need XYZ. Literally, case in point, with this client we're working with, the head of HR, she's like, okay, these are the metrics I need, but she's not thought about the story. She's not translated it into what she actually needs to do, and the story she needs to tell, the progress and value she needs to demonstrate. She's turned it into a list of metrics. The data people are just gonna be like, oh yeah, cool, we can build that list of metrics, and then it's not going to serve that purpose because we're not thinking about story. And then the third thing is, action kind of sits separate from data, as in you have to have you have your data layer, and then you have your insight layer. And I guess then you have your knowledge layer. So data, insight, knowledge being the data, well, it's data, information, knowledge normally, but I'm going to tweak it to data, insight, knowledge triangle. But then you've got action that comes from that. And knowledge doesn't necessarily equal action because you've got to do something. And there has to be enough of a driver and enough of an incentive. And just having a dashboard and being able to say, oh, yeah, that's interesting. It's kind of my pet peeve. And I'll be honest, Toby, you do this quite a lot. When people say, oh, it would be interesting to see with the data, like that doesn't mean anything. Like, it's interesting to see is not helpful because that means that, yeah, kind of cool. I'm not going to do anything with it. If it's like, I want to see this because I want to be able to make XY decision, or I want to be able to make this change, hiring, let's say, I want to know where people are coming from so I can work out where to spend my money on talent acquisition. Is it still coming from LinkedIn? Do I need to put more in the corporate website? Actually, is our business really heavily about network and face-to-face, and is the most important thing that I spend my time going to events and meeting people? Those kind of questions are things we want to be asking. And I know I've just talked for about 10 minutes. Sorry, but I love this topic.
That's the whole point. You are supposed to do most of the talking. I'm just asking the questions, right? So, probably this isn't question 2, but
Yep. Subset question 2.
so
Question
Question
one, sorry.
1.1. Like most data people aren't human centered or user centered, was what I think you said.
Yeah.
Why?
It's a good question. I think it's a very different set of skills. And I mean, I don't know 100%, but my knowing what I do know from my experience and the people that I know and the people that I talk to is that we're funneled at quite a young age to be you're a people person or you're a sciencey or a maths person. And I do think that our education system kind of prepares us for right, you're going to do maths, you do statistics and mechanics, and then you're going to go through and you're going to do X, Y, and Z and computer um, science or whatever, and then machine learning and whatever it is that you path that you choose to go down doesn't really have lots of opportunity for that kind of business and connection. I know universities try, and I know that they have business modules and you have things where you go and you do work for business, but I do think the kind of person that those courses attract, perhaps through the way that we talk about science and maths, because a lot of people can be very proud, I'm not a mathsy person, right? So if you are mathsy, and I know it comes a bit of your identity, I really do think there's a strong background in that. But I also think there's this sort of familiarity with numbers and this misconception that at the junior levels you don't have to teach someone. I so my husband's I talk about this all the time. Sorry, but he's a very big part of my life. He's a software engineer, and he's got a group of friends that he was friends with at university who all did the same course. So they're all software engineers, and now they're all like 35ish. We met them. We met up a few weeks ago, and they were all just moaning about all their problems with people. And essentially, what they were saying is, I became a software engineer, so I didn't have to talk to people. And now I'm gonna have to do all the people and all the politics. And it's just really interesting that it's something that happens as we grow, but it's not something that you have inherently at the beginning. And I think, yeah, people go into this career, be it software, be it data, sometimes, not all the time, because they don't want to have to talk to people. Numbers are more comforting. And yeah, it all comes down to people at the end of the day.
I mean, it's an because when we talk about reshaping how HR and people teams operate, you're essentially delivering a product or a service to the rest of the organization, right? Or a suite of products and services, not just you know, a single product. And so therefore, insight, dashboards, whatever data has got to probably be one of those products or services you're delivering to the organization to help any of them make smarter decisions, better, to help them do an action, right? And I think that's the thing you mentioned there, that not a lot of action comes to it. If I go back to my time in a retailer, annual survey annual survey got cut through every store. Every store has their dashboard of what the survey results were like. Cool, over the next year you need to move these three metrics. And it was like, cool, how, why, what? And it was just like there was complete inaction. I think at that time there was 350 stores. So you're talking about 350 dashboards that were created for each store. Or the dashboard was the same, you were just cutting it through each store, right? But then nothing ever changed from those. I never saw, there were all these action plans that were delivered, but nothing reasonably ever changed. Which is
So
interesting, right? Oh, sorry, go on.
well, I was going to say something exciting about that is I think that AI is actually giving opportunities for that to change because I think let's take Water for example. Friends at Water. Last time I saw a demo of their product, which is an employee essentially employee listening platform, employee survey platform, but it's done very regularly and it's entirely kind of AI driven. And the manager gets insights, but then crucially, they get an action plan, like they get suggestions. And I think it's having the time and space to be able to interpret the data and say, this is what it's showing me, even if you're told that, but then to have that extra step. Platforms that have that built in or dashboards that have that built in, whether you're buying a solution or you've built something yourself, is what's going to make a difference on this, I think.
Oh, which is a beautiful segue to question number 2. I forgot we agreed last week that we could do sound effects when we say the question. So there you go. It's now time for question number 2. And I'm doing it twice because I missed it on the first one. So now we're all caught up with how many times we've used the sound effect on this episode. So the segue, if we hadn't just lost the thread that I so neatly got to question 2, every platform seems to come with a dashboard. So whether it's a HR system, learning platform, CRM tools, finance systems, well-being apps, whatever, right? They all come with a dashboard. Are they actually useful, or are they actually just there because people expect to see it as part of the product?
Both, but useful isn't defined by the vendor, by the platform. Useful is defined by the people using the data. Because everybody who uses a platform, let's take a learning platform, everybody has different things that they need to report on. Okay, some of them are going to be the same, but some people have extra like compliance or regulation related things, or some teams will be very far ahead and be thinking about like quite forward thinking metrics, which perhaps the vendor hasn't considered. So you can't really just take an off the shelf dashboard and expect it to work for you, especially if you don't really understand necessarily exactly how all the data is being defined. So, therefore, exactly what it's showing you, because sometimes you can use slightly different measures but under the same name, and that can be a bit confusing to people. And so, I think it's definitely there because people expect to see it. I think I know a theme that certainly you talk about is like people demonstrating their value and justifying their existence. Well, I think from the part of the company, they always have like adoption or use, right? Because if people aren't adopting or using your platform, you're not going to be spending the money on it. No, that's not necessarily true. Perhaps you should consider not spending the money on it, although that's often not what happens. So I think there's an element of expectation there. I think they absolutely can be usable, but you really need to be clever and think about, right, what do we need to measure? What do we want to know? How is that, like, what I think it comes back to, I have two questions that I ask all the time, right? What are we trying to achieve? And then like how we know we will have achieved it is probably quite helpful. Like a dashboard could be quite useful for that if you've set it up the right way. But then it's just so what at the end of that, which I suppose is technically three questions. But like, so what are we gonna do with this data? What is it? How is it gonna affect any decision or action that we take?
So I kind of go back again to the first point you made, or one of the second, third point, to the first question, that when you design, let's say, a benefits platform or a learning management system, any kind of employee-facing platform, you would like to think that human-centered design is part of that platform design process to make the platform what the user needs. Now, I would argue the very fact that you're developing some of these platforms because there's a market for them means you're probably not. You're just trying to design the best version of a thing. So let's just take another swipe at LMSs, LXPs, whatever you want to call them. I think most of the design of those platforms satisfies a business need rather than an end user need. I think and therefore, what you can do is you can try and improve them based on some user needs, but really is existent a user need in the first place, if that makes sense. Um, and so when you're designing a dashboard on said platform, the user is different, right? The user is the person who's procuring and managing that platform on the other side, inside the organization. Do you think any level of human-centered design is going into the build of that dashboard in the same way that would for the platform, or do you think it's something that's in there you kind of alluded to it, but to validate its own existence? Again, the catchphrase I use.
I mean, there's an element of that. They would have thought, I hope, what do people want to know? But the problem is when you're building a platform, your intent always is to scale, right? And to reach as many people as possible. That's the whole point of platform, software as a service kind of things, right? And so you don't actually want to be hyper specific. You want it to be kind of a base level, maybe with options for customization, but you want a base level, or even maybe you want as so many as things are possible, but you're only going to show a subset. Because if you think about when you get onboarded to a new platform, thinking from the user's perspective now, you want to be able to see the things you want to see, and then you possibly want to, if you've got enough like understanding of how this works, you might take a human-centered approach and be like, right, okay, so what do we need what do I need? What does my team need? What do the people who are going to be using this need? But they can't build that in automatically unless it's part of your onboarding, where you very much can set up your measurement, your metrics, your dashboards to show you exactly what you want. But for most LMS like integrations that I have even tangentially been a part of, like there's so many other technical things that take up the time of onboarding, and there's so many issues with this not connecting to this, and errors, and also upskilling the team and how to use it, because so often they're very unfriendly, or user unfriendly, because I would say that they kind of based on all the ones that have already kind of existed before. Whereas, but I do actually, I kind of take that back, because I think a lot of things are changing now with AI and how people build. And is LMS dead? And I don't really know. And people say dead all the time as well. It's such hyperbole. But regardless, I've gone on a sidetrack. I think that It can be. I think there's an opportunity to, and when you've got those unicorn people, yeah, I know, hyperbole. And when we've got these unicorn people who understand A, data, but B, how to communicate it, then I think maybe you might do that as long as you have the time and headspace to do it. But I think so often things are kind of rushed through, or there's delays, and then suddenly we have to be using it, and there's a steep learning curve, and they just don't have the time to really think about it. And then maybe not even the knowledge and awareness of everything that's available. It's like with all of these things. If we think of the double diamond, Design Council's double diamond, we talk about it a lot of Freeformers. So many people start in the middle. They start at the beginning of the second diamond. I understand the problem. Now I'm going to solve for it, right? They don't take the time to really understand everything that's going on. And I think there's an element of that. It's like, right, we need a dashboard. So we need us to show this. And they don't actually take the time to interrogate. And there's no shade at people really, because they're operating within the parameters that they have. And so often that's just fighting this fire, fighting that fire, and they don't have time to think a bit bigger.
Oh, so you're changing some of my. I'm changing some of my questions on the fly, but based on what you said.
Whoa.
Well, I'm slightly like crafting the wording because question number 3 is we've just talked about platforms and having their own dashboards and data individually. Now, what the end goal, I would imagine, or a good goal, would be to have some sort of, I'm going to use the phrase and then you can talk about the phrase a bit more, but a data lake, right? To pull all that data into a single place to then create the dashboards. But even at that point, if you would to do that as a HR people or L&D team, you're still in a little bit of a data vacuum. So how big should a data lake be to be able
Yeah.
to pull any meaningful story from it?
Okay, so first off, just on the term, I don't hate the term data lake. I first became aware of it at a time where there were so many different variants of things, and there were lots of buzzwords that people were jumping on, and data lake was quite new. There was data warehouse, data lake, and then around the same time, there were all the things like blockchain, and everyone was like, this is the answer to the future. And so that kind of shaped some of my skepticism. I like data lake, fine. It's a word, it's a phrase. We all know what we mean, I hope, meaning a pool. That's why lake comes in. It's a pool of data. It's pooling or bringing together, connecting data from so many different sources all together so that you can use them together to really understand what's going on and hopefully leading to driving action, although as we've just discussed, not always the case. So that's on data lake. Your question was, how big should a data lake be? Well, I mean, how long is a piece of string? Is literally the modern version of that question. It depends.
Let me reframe it. Like, how many rivers should be flowing into the data lake?
Okay, fair.
Or what
Well,
rivers? What are the
what rivers is
broad
probably a
rivers
better
should
question.
be?
This
Yeah,
is
yeah.
maybe why you shouldn't ask questions up on the fly. What rivers should be flowing into a data lake? Again, it depends who you are and what you're trying to find out. But we're not just talking HR, and I think this is where your question's very much getting to, is that if you work in HR and you've got the opportunity to have all your data integrated so you can make decisions, bring in stuff that is not typically HR data so that you can start making bigger decisions. Massive ones are going to be anything related to productivity, anything related to revenue, also anything related to profit, kind of bottom line those as well. Because if you can show any causality or any links, even correlation doesn't necessarily equal causation, but it looks good or bad depending on what's going on. That will just help stand you in a much better place for demonstrating the value, because CEOs, CFOs, they don't necessarily use the language of HR. They're not as interested in retention, attrition, tenure, that kind of stuff, even employee happiness and engagement. They're not really into that. They're into those cold, hard numbers like, what are our sales figures? What's our revenue? What's our profit margins? What's our productivity? All of these kind of things. So if you can link the two together, fantastic. And if your data is so well integrated that it's really seamless to do so because all these rivers flow into a data lake, well, brilliant. That's wonderful, because then you can start demonstrating that value. And maybe it's not just your internal financial figures. You might be having anything that you're using that generates data. If it is pooled into the same place, I know this is big and expensive and outside of the budgets, let's say, maybe even the imagination of a lot of small and medium businesses, and also a lot of HR and L&D teams. But if you have that opportunity, absolutely seize it with both hands, because then you can start tying together so many different cases and really demonstrating the value that HR is making.
So certainly bigger HR teams have their own data and insights team or person. Um, it seems like, well, I would assume it would be better to have, because I don't know about other business functions, but does every business function have like a data and insights team? And if so, we think about squads and guilds and tribes and all that kind of jazz from the Spotify model. That it would appear that acting in functional silos, you're creating lots of little lakes rather than one big one. Now, because we're kind of expanding, right? You get the platforms have their own little data ecosystem and the dashboard, and so everything's contained into there. And then with it as a HR team, you've got several of those: ATS, HRIS, LMS, anything that ends in an S. All then feeding into one data and insight person that's pulling together, in some organizations, spreadsheets and reports, which is
Yeah.
fine, right? It's all still, you're still extracting it to bring it to one place to do some broader analysis. And then you kind of have this broader organizational data lake. Is it possible to go from like one straight to the third one and miss out this middle bit, or is that middle bit like a key thing? You need create your little data lake first across the organization, and then chuck all those data lakes together to make a data ocean. Like, yeah, I'd be interested to
I
know
don't
your
really
thoughts.
think that's how. Maybe I misunderstand the question here, but I don't really think that's necessarily how data works. Like, you don't use data up in one way. You don't have to create
No,
like.
but I don't think that is I think that's the issue. That's not how data works, but that's how organizations are set up. That you'll have gone through. We as a HR team, we've got all these platforms. We need someone to drive the insight from it, and the organization is like, well, that's not enough insight. We need you to connect it to the others. So I think it's not a data thing. It's more of a organizational design thing about where do the people sit and how they do the work.
Yeah, yes, that could be it. So you asked, does every department have their own data and insights person? And I was just trying to think. I was like, I think the support services have data and insights people, or certainly data and insights capability. It's hard to know if people who are, it's not doing the work, but you know what I mean, really driving forward with whatever the purpose of the business is. Do they have their own data and insights people? I think it depends. Some will and some won't. We have a natural inclination to stick to what we know. It makes scope easier, scope of projects, scope of role. We understand the limitations. This is where we are. And my personal opinion is, even if you've got somebody pulling stuff together, fantastic, that's brilliant, because then you compare that with the data and insights person from another. So data and insights from HR combines with data and insights from IT, brilliant. Even if they are two separate kind of ponds, I guess, before they become an ocean, that to me is probably better than nothing. The question would be, how much, from a technical perspective, how much are you doing to that data before it reaches the lake? I feel like we might be going a bit too technical here, but
Laboring the analogy, but I think we
no,
can.
no. Well, the reason, well, what I'm saying is, if you apply calculations to data, then you don't have the raw underlying data, and you don't actually necessarily have an idea of the bigger picture in the same way. Sometimes that's good, because let's say salary, for example, if you don't have everybody's individual salary, that's a PII thing, that's a personal information, personally identifiable information point, right? So you might have it aggregated into a group somehow, or a band, or whatever it is, and actually the analysis you do is with that band, because that's useful. But there might be times when actually banding doesn't help you, and you want to work with the raw data. ENPS, going to a completely different example, but this is a good example of this. If you're given an ENPS figure, actually ENPS is massively, as a calculation, swayed. Obviously, it's very inherent thing. It's number of promoters minus number of detractors, and then you get a number. Sorry, is it percent rather than number? It's percent, isn't it, or number? But it can be very easily swung by like highs and lows, so outliers. And so if things are really, and to go back to our salaries, if you don't band it correctly, if you put everybody together and you're really highly swung by outliers, by like really high and really low data, then it really affects what's your average, especially if you're calculating averages and mean, which most people tend to do. So I don't want to get too drawn into the maths, but if you put too much, if you calculate data too much, or you transform it too much because you've got that level up into kind of statistics, or aggregated counts, then maybe the underlying data becomes less useful.
I think that's why it's really interesting now, the project that we're doing at the moment, that, we were like, okay, we'd love to know what EMPS is. But then we sat back and went, actually, no, it'd be really sorry. It would be important to know how many detractors, promoters, and well, I forgot what the middle one is, ambivalent people.
Neutral. It's just neutral.
Neutrals, thank you. What the makeup of that is, how many people did respond and what were the breakdown of those things? Because that's the actual raw data, right? And if you're going to
Yeah.
bring some data to the table, you're better off bringing that raw data, because I think a lot of the data we're seeing in some of the projects is like you've given us the result of a formula, which is good, but it's not. What's more useful is what makes up that, and I think that's where platform dashboards give you the calculation. They don't necessarily give you those figures. And when I did a lot of work with Workplace by Facebook, now Meta, a lot of their data, well, for one as a client, was non-existent. We couldn't see the data. They weren't giving it to us because probably they were harboring it and selling it on themselves. But even when we did, we were getting the calculation. So when we were like, where's the granular level of data? We don't have it. You'd have to get an API or go into the back end and figure that out for yourself.
Right, and that's technically quite advanced for a lot of people. Either they don't have the ability, or they don't have the time, or they don't even know what's possible, right? And I think that this is, but to counter your argument, the reason why people put dashboards in place that already have calculations in there is because they're assuming that a lot of the users don't have the time to be able to serve it themselves, to use it themselves, to be able to do the analysis themselves, which they quite possibly some people don't. But then you're like, oh, but actually, I wanted to see every second Tuesday removed for some reason, which obviously in a platform, you're not going to get obscure requests like that embedded within.
Okay, so the last two questions feature buzzwords. So let's move to question 4. Data driven versus data informed. So let's imagine we've now created a big, glorious data lake in the middle of our organization. All that data is flowing there, and we can pull out any insights we want. We're now going to be data driven, or are we?
I mean, this is one of those terms that comes down to what do you actually mean by it? Because I think a lot of people who use the word data driven actually mean with what I would defer to term as data informed. So in my head, and again, this comes very much formed by my time at the ODI, and particularly with, she was CTO at the time, Dr. Jenny Tennyson. So she's very much thinking at the forefront of kind of data and the words that we use, how they're really important. Anyway, her whole thing was data driven kind of takes that human out of the loop in the same way. You're not using your judgment, you're not using your knowledge and your context. You're just, the data says this, and therefore we will do this. And we know with like bias in data, machine learning, AI especially, that this can lead to unfavorable outcomes for people who are perhaps systemically biased against. So it's something that's really important. So you can't always just take a decision that data says, take it as read without any interrogation at all. Errors happen. If suddenly our sales jump to like 1 million this month, right? If you were data driven in the sense that I'm now using it, you would just be like, oh, fantastic, brilliant, right? We can spend more, we can change all our decisions, we can go on a hiring spree and hire, right? I'm really hoping you wouldn't do that, because you have enough common sense to be like, what the hell, Emily? This is clearly not right. Why is this dashboard showing this? Because
Yeah.
there's an error in the data. Whereas data informed is that complete opposite, right? It is using your human judgment, knowledge of the context to be like, actually, is this right, or should we be questioning it? And judgment with data is so important. And we talk about it, like I used to run data cleaning courses and all these kind of things. And a lot of it actually came down to a human and a judgment. And so you have to kind of put systems in place for cleaning in particular, because otherwise people just do things at random and you end up with more mess. But, well, that's how you get mess in the first place. But a lot of it comes down to judgment and understanding of the context of what the data is telling you. And I think that is the difference between how I use data driven and data informed. But I will acknowledge that an awful lot of people, when they say data driven, they are meaning that a human still uses some common sense as well.
You hope. And so my last question number 5. The timing was way better on that. I'm figuring out how to use the new Riverside features, in an okay way. Another catchphrase: of yours, I'd like to say anecdata. So that's my jumping off point for question 5 is I think when anyone listens to this, and I would assume that everyone thinks of quantitative data rather than qualitative data. You know, when you're putting through into dashboard, that's kind of the first place you go to. So where does qualitative data fit into all of this mix? And that, you know, how do you best surface that information on something like a dashboard, or do you at all, I guess?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So first of all, anecdata. It's not mine. First person I ever heard use it was a former colleague, Jack Hardinger's. So I will just, give him the credit, even though he probably won't watch this. You never know, might do. Jack always used to use, anecdata. So it's when we don't have any actual data, we just have people's opinions of the data or people's opinion of what's happening. So it's combining, in case you hadn't guessed, anecdotal or anecdote with data. And I think it's really important this because so many times, like coming at this from we work from a human-centered design perspective, and we'll always like talk to our stakeholders and see if they understand the bigger picture. So a lot of the time these are people in HR or L&D or sometimes marketing and sometimes even management teams or leadership teams, depends on the size of the organization. And they have a certain opinion about how things are working. And we go and talk to users, and there's always some things that are surprising. Always, always. You are not your user, you are not your employee, and how you perceive things to be will be very different from how they perceive things. They're not a monolith, so they will think lots of different things as well. Like, just to make that super clear, I am not saying that management think one thing always and employees always think the same thing, but it's different. There's obviously scales and people are different. So that's why, like, we talk about anecdata, it's kind of a bad thing. People are like, oh, well, I've kind of got this data point, but it's not actually a real data point because it's got my own inherent bias on it and my own judgment, knowing everything I know with my motivations and my beliefs and what I'm trying to work towards and what I've experienced. So that's what anecdata is. And then the question about qualitative data. So can we represent qualitative data in dashboards? Yes, and AI is making this much easier to do because sentiment analysis becomes much easier, much faster, not necessarily better, depends on the process you're going through. I think there are some ways in which AI is fantastic for qualitative analysis, but I also think if you're doing a crappy job with like no human in the loops and and not enough sets, then it can be terrible as well. And I don't really want to get drawn into that argument. But inherently on a dashboard, you are going to have to kind of label your data in some way for it to become meaningful, because otherwise, if you have every single verbatim quote that somebody said as a data point, your data is going to be unusable. So you have to put them into buckets or codes or themes or label it in some way so that you can then start to see trends between people. And it's really useful. Like, I'm talking very abstract here. So let's get very, very detailed. Exit interviews is a great one, right? If you want to be looking at why people are leaving, you're going to have to combine quant and qual, because you're going to look at, okay, who is leaving our organization? Where are they leaving from? What team, department, office, site, whatever it is. How long have they been here? You want to bring in more quant data, like I don't know, maybe like progression or stuff. Like, have they've been promoted recently? But then, right, what about their one-to-one data? You may have that, you may not have that. What about their performance data? That's typically a mix of quant and qual. You'll be wanting to pull that in. And then exit interviews are almost always qual, even if they are surveys. Survey doesn't necessarily equal quantitative data, right? If you've given someone a free form box, then they can put their own reason in. If you've given someone a reason for leaving and you've just done a tick box with no like expand, then yeah, okay, that is quantitative, but you're not going to get the answer that you want because it's like discrete. Whereas, like, if you have an interview, you can then analyze the themes in that, and then you can say, actually, this person left because of X, Y, and Z reason. It was all these things combined. They didn't feel that they were paid enough. They felt that there wasn't a career option, but also actually something happened in their family at the same time. And it was a mix of all of these things. Well, there's not much you can do about family, but there is something you can do to look at, actually, were they being paid unfairly, or is that a perception of being paid unfairly? Is it true that we don't have any clear promotional routes, or is it just that person actually wasn't very good? And you can start using that in hand en masse in line with all the other data that you've got, so that you can actually start to make some decisions and decide, do we need to change something about our employee experience?
And so, do you think that's the ability to do that scale now, like you say, with AI? do you now think it's because the issue with human-centered design has always been the perception is it takes too much time and resource to then enact a design, and then the old kind of sales approach would be for someone to say, oh yeah, but it shortcuts design time in the future, makes design quicker, which if you're still going to stakeholders for feedback and all that kind of stuff, maybe not, who knows. So do you think this is now a perfect storm where you kind of almost have no excuse not to be using human-centered design now because it is so easy to do at scale? Or
no, I don't think so. I think if you weren't doing it before, you're going to have a mindset change to do it differently. Like when we change, we use the cone beam model, right? So we talk about capability, opportunity, and motivation. Like, sure, we've got the opportunity to use it because it's not expensive, it doesn't take a lot of time. Do we have the capability? Question. Do we have the motivation? If nothing has changed in the motivation, we're not going to suddenly start doing it. And then also, we have targets and we have to complete things in a certain amount of time. If suddenly we want to introduce even 5 days or however long, like suddenly extra, you're going to have to really, really clearly make that case to your business, right? Because otherwise, it's going to be, why is it taking longer to do things? Like, well, it's much quicker than it used to be. It's like, that's not going to fly because that was never a consideration in the first place. So I don't think that there's no excuse not to. And I don't think that everyone will automatically start doing human-centered design because it is easier now, unfortunately.
do you think there are teams out there that say they are people first or people centric, HR and people teams that are people first, human centric, all that kind of stuff, and aren't practicing human centered design?
I mean, what a loaded question, Toby. Yes, of course. Of course there are. I'm a
Isn't that
people
nuts
person.
though? Isn't that like
Yeah.
isn't that crazy?
To us, yes, because we're so aware of this. And this is our bread and butter and we've been doing it for a long time. But they would argue, I'll take learning, for example. The ODI that I work, like where I used to work, I've said some amazing things about them. Now I'll say some less amazing things about them. We used to write learning outcomes and we used to do learning needs analysis, right? And figure out what people needed to know. But did we actually talk to learners and end users? No, it just wasn't within our understanding and our remit. And we thought that because we were doing learning outcomes and we were doing learning needs analyses, then we were people first, right? And we were very much focused on, well, we wouldn't have said people first, learner centric or, focused on learners. But you are not your learner, you are not your user, you are not your employee. And it took me, I think, quite a while to actually to realize that I know what I think, but I'm coming with so many biases and what I think is the right thing to do. But it's only when you actually go and talk to users, whether we're talking about building e-learning modules or dashboards or policies or literally anything, it's only when you talk to learners and really understand their motivations and their pain points that you will have a better picture of what it is that you could do.
Wow, I could not have put it better myself. So I think we now pivot to. I was seeing if there's a sound effect that would work for this. Our article of the week. Here's Emily. I will share it. You just need to introduce it. Hang on. And now it's time for our article of the week.
Which is Keir Starmer announces AI tutors for 450,000. Why does it keep making noises?
I was doing the drum roll. You were supposed to do it after the drum roll. We should have this conversation before we go live.
There's a massive delay. Every time you've done it, you've been speaking over it from what I've heard. So I have no idea what listeners are hearing.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well,
but anyway,
we'll listen back.
Way to steal my thunder. The article. Keir Starmer announces AI tutors for 450,000 pupils to help close attainment gaps. We thought we'd mix it up and have a little video this week. So let's watch the inspiration that is the Prime Minister. I can't hear it.
You can't hear it? Maybe there's no sound. I was trying to do it without sharing screen, so let's stop that one and let's just play it the old-fashioned way by doing a screen share, shall we? Let's do that. What's he talking about? It doesn't matter because I've got it now. Here we go. Hopefully you can hear this.
Launching new tools like our AI tutors that we will roll out to the 450,000 children on free school meals to close the attainment gap. And today, I can announce our new AI jobs tool that will help those out of work find the right jobs, create their CVs, and get back into work.
Cool. Thoughts? why have you picked this up? I mean, why have you picked this? Need any explanation?
Need any explanation? Oh my god! Like, okay, so before we go any further, it's not about politics. It's not just about bashing Keir Starmer, who is probably a very nice person who works hard, blah 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 blah, and is the most uninspiring communicator I have ever heard in my life. Makes everything sound dull, but that's not what we're here
about
for.
to break into tears.
He probably is. Probably very stressed.
Bored to tears. That's where the phrase. Yeah, he's probably quite stressed.
Yes, but okay. So the point is that they want to give 450,000 to pupils who are on free school meals. Now, free school meals is the way that they have essentially, if you're eligible for free school meals, that means that you are socially and economically not so successful. You know, it normally comes down, well, it's normally economic actually, isn't it? It's normally to do with percentage of household income. Pupil premium plus, all that kind of stuff, unless they've changed it since the last time I looked. And we know that there's a direct correlation between people who are on pupil premium plus, and attainment. And that's why they put more money into them, right? Because we want everybody to be successful. And if you've got a harder home life, or you don't have as much money and you're worrying about so many other things, your children's education is what suffers.
Can I just say, the way you explained that with the storytelling and the explanation was a million times better than the way because the thing we said, right, it's not about politics, but the lack of energy, excitement, and storytelling that go into that. Like, there's like when you position it how you said it, you go, oh, actually, that's pretty meaningful.
I feel in many ways Keir Starmer's like a dashboard. Like, he regurgitates the data and he'll say the things, but he doesn't have the so what and the exciting and the storytelling. He doesn't take people on the journey, and that's also the problem with the dashboard, right? Sometimes. So I think there is an interesting parallel that I hadn't really thought of prior to this live stream. Anyway, so what do I think about this? I mean, I have so many conflicting thoughts, right? Because who is building these? Are they going to be any good? Can the government procure anything for? Is it going to just be a total crock of crap? Probably. But actually, does it also potentially have the opportunity? Because we know how good AI can be at times in helping people feel more confident. I'll let you in a moment talk about the feedback that you've just got from creating a very, very small and personalized coach in a specific area. So I do think that there's so much potential, but I also don't trust the government to be able to procure things at all that'll be any good, any NHS app that has existed. But it is exciting in some ways.
I would agree with you. So I think the first AI tool, the AI tutors, is a way more complicated build than his dazzling words may have given him credit for. The second one, how to write a CV chat GPT thing, is what it sounded like. Seems a little bit more straightforward. I would argue, though, it doesn't address some of the major systemic that the latter one doesn't address some of the major systemic issues with education and work. In that a CV isn't the be all and end all of the world of work, kind of thing.
No, absolutely. And he talked about like matching job seekers up to the right jobs. Like, well, I don't know if you ever tried the government's like what job should I do thing way back in the day. Like, it's so limited to a narrow pool of what jobs are available because it only uses jobs within their known universe, which is obviously a fraction of the jobs that are actually available as well. So there's got to be some quite big and imaginative thinking to make some of these come about. We accept that, but why don't you talk about what you've done recently and just to share with people how an AI coach can make people feel quite different.
So yeah, I've just built essentially an AI coach that helps people practice a realistic feedback conversation, whether it's formal or informal. How do you give feedback with essentially radical candor? An equal amount of love, care, and attention, but also rigor and matter of factness and fact, right? And so over the past couple of weeks, built it, tested it, and I think the end user has been surprised and delighted because I think there's even from myself, a genuine skepticism about Yeah, sure. Have a conversation with a robot and it's going to help me. But the level of thinking and design that's gone into it, the organizational context it has, the context about the frameworks, capability frameworks, coaching frameworks, all of that kind of stuff. You know, the prompt that or the code that sits behind it is like somewhere between 25 to 40 pages, as well as all the additional context it's pulling from. But it's giving people the time and space to practice something that they don't want to practice in front of an actual person.
Mm.
And so they are really acknowledging that this is not the be all and end all of being able to have a really good feedback conversation, but it's an incredibly important part of the journey. And this AI simulated coach thing sat inside what was probably going to be about a 45-minute to 1 hour learning module. And we were like, this thing itself does most of the heavy lifting of what that needs to achieve. So what does that module look like now? Really straightforward. A video, really cool video actually, which I really like. Shout out to our friends at the Like Minded for creating an awesome video. Then you use this AI conversation simulator, and then you recommend it to people who you think would also like it. That's it. It's those three things, right? A very simple mechanic. But I think if you can program it correctly with the right context and right abilities, it can do some of the stuff. It could be an AI tutor. But I think what you're going to need is, and this is what I hope they're designing, because I think the tender was for about 5 million quid, having looked at it just before this, is that you need several AI tutors in specific domains for specific year groups and stuff like that. So this is a pretty mammoth undertaking, I think, to be able to do it well. I would also worry about the AI fluency of, well, people designing it, but also the people then using it, the children using it on the other end as well. I'm also slightly skeptical of the socioeconomic grouping of where these AI tutors are getting deployed, because my assumption would be big assumption, that if you have in a lower socioeconomic bracket and therefore struggling to pay for food, are you going to be able to pay for technology as well? I'm not saying the government are obviously subsidizing this and handing it out, but therefore you're less likely to be tech fluent than someone who has lots of money. And so therefore, even just engaging with a tool like this on a cognitive basis, like I think there are so many ways this could be incredible and fantastic and really, really work. But I think there are so many pitfalls in which it could fall down. And like you say, regardless of what party's running the government have a horrendous track record of procuring things.
Yep.
Full stop.
Yep.
So I'd love to know who's doing it, because there are 1,000,001 companies I say who shouldn't do it. There's 1,000,001 companies. No, there's very few companies I say would probably be able to do it. I will finish in a second. I will absolutely bite my own arm off if an educational body is the one building this. I think it needs to be a collaborative effort between an educational body and a tech company. I don't think either of those parties by themselves build the answer here. I think it's got to have 2 or 3 inputs. But
I think you also need to have in that partnership or consortium, you need to have some sort of mental health experts and people who understand the impact of AI on children. Like, we're literally just talking about taking away dopamine addictive technology in the form of social media from kids. Oh, and we're going to give them something that is also going to be full of dopamine, like dopamine driven actions, and there's completely addictive, and it's been proved to be addictive, and there's so many cases of really harmful use. Now, I'm sure they'll put lots of safeguards in for the really obvious stuff, right? Mental health flags, all those kind of things, but like, I don't know what happens when you just end up talking all of the time to someone and the impact that has, and you don't go and talk to your to friends and people in real life. Like, what does that impact does that have? Will it help people? Will it not? I do not have any of the answers to this. I don't know if anybody does, but they're questions that I would want to ask. And then the other thing is, there's all this like massive backlash against AI amongst young people, right? Like, they hate it. Or I don't know, again, they're not one monolith, right? I can't speak for the whole of Gen Z and Gen Alpha. The little ones would love it if they could. My kids would love it. They're not allowed to touch it. They don't really know what AI is, and they're not allowed to use it. But like teenagers, certainly like people in their 20s, who I realize would fall out of this bracket, very anti it. You see all those like AI slop written all over the tube and stuff like that. So I wouldn't want to do this, put it that way, but I think it has the potential to be very exciting.
It's got to augment a human experience, and I think the thing that we've seen time and again in the workforce is that, you know, the second half, the older half of the workforce, come from a very, you know, interpersonal skill led workplace where it's all in person, you're having conversation, doing in-person meetings. The interpersonal human to human stuff is really important. The emerging generations are the opposite. You know, they are tech savvy, they're tech forward. I'm not saying they have no interpersonal skills, but something like this has to be augmented with interpersonal skills. Otherwise, what we will lose, and we may be willing to lose about based on what you've said, I don't think we are, is that we will lose a generation of people that are lack the interpersonal skills to interact with the rest of the world.
Which, coming back to what I said at the beginning, like talking about between data and business, like interpersonal skills are what makes the world go round, and you can't get away from it.
At which point I think we should leave it there. So I hope you enjoyed this. I very much enjoyed it. I think I always like talking to you about what you're passionate, excited about, because you say stuff in a lot more eloquent way than I do. I tend to just say it louder with more hands moving. And thank you for the article of the week as well, because I think that's prompted a lot of discussion. It's unfortunate we just kind of ran out of time to deep dive into AI tutors more, but maybe, as we always say on this live stream, that is a topic for the future. Anyway, I don't think Emily knows this, but we're going to take next week off because I've got to go to a school picnic.
Okay.
So we won't be back next week, but I think we've only got a couple more weeks until the school holidays, in which point we are taking a break over the school holidays, just because logistically that makes the sense for both of us. And then we'll be back in September. So if you are enjoying these, like, subscribe, and enjoy the few episodes we've got left until the summer. But until 2 weeks' time, this has been Freeformers Unplugged with Toby and Emily. See you soon.
Bye bye.